we gotta talk about variables in Figma. They're extremely powerful, yet not a lot of designers actually know how to properly use them. People don't realize their actual potential. Now, we know that variables can help you switch your designs to different themes, light and dark modes, and even help you make your designs responsive. But how do we achieve all this together at scale when you're designing hundreds of screens? And especially, how do we reuse these variables in different projects? There should be one variable system that we can use whenever we start a new project and just modify it for that specific project. In this video, we are going to learn step by step how we can create such a variable system that works for all kinds of designs. No matter what kind of design you make, you will be able to add different themes, light and dark modes, and make your designs 100% responsive. And this, by the way, includes typography. And the best part is that you can use this variable system in all your projects in the future. And let me tell you this, a lot of companies out there are willing to pay huge money for people who know this. If you watch this video till the end and understand what I am about to teach you, I promise you will be among the top 1% of the designers out there. Pretty amazing, right? Now, before we start, let me just mention a few things. Number one, I'm assuming you know the basics of Figma. If not, go watch my complete Figma tutorial. It's 100% free. Link is in the description of this video. Number two, there is a practice Figma file. Link is in the description. Get that. You can use it to follow along in this video. Number three, if you are lazy and don't want to do the hard work, link to the final Figma file is also available in the description, but it comes at a small price. You can get that file, copy my variables in your projects, and change them as per your requirements. Now grab a coffee and let's dive in. If you get the practice Figma file from the link in the description of this video and import it into Figma, this is what you're gonna see. We have a very basic card design here. In this part of this video, we are going to quickly cover the basics of variable. Just make sure that you are on the basics page. We're gonna go to the advanced page later on. If you already know the basics of variables, you can skip to the next chapter where we start exploring the advanced use cases of variables. Alright, so we can see we have this card design, and if we select this, we can see that it is not using any styles or variables currently. To create our first variable, just deselect anything on the screen, and in the properties panel, you will have this local variables option. Click it and it will open up this little pop-up. This is where all the variables that we create will go. To create a variable, click this create variable button. You can create 4 types of variables: color, number, string, and boolean variable. Let's start by creating a color variable. It has created our first variable and given it color as the default name. You can give it any name you want, for example, blue. In the next column, we can set the value of this variable. This is a color variable, so we can assign it some color code. Just click and pick any color and just close it to set the value. Let's create another variable and call it white. In the value, I'm gonna leave it as white color. You can create as many variables as you like. Let's create another one and call it black, and set the value to black color. Now that we have our variables created, it's time to apply them to our design. In the card design, if I select this button and go to fill, we can assign it some custom color, or I can go into the libraries tab where I can see all the variables that we just created. Just select the variable that you want. Let's select blue for the button, and now you can see that in the design our button is now blue. In the variables, if I change the value of the blue variable to something else, we can see that the color of the button changes. Let's select this text now and give it a fill of white variable. And just like before, if I change the color value, it gets updated in the design. So far, it is very similar to local color styles, but don't worry, there is much more to it. Let's set the other elements like background of this frame to our white variable, and for these two texts we can set it to black variable. Now let's create another variable, but this time we're gonna create a number variable. And just like before, you can give it any name. I'm gonna call it space medium, and for the value I'm gonna set it to 16. Before I show you how to use them, let's just add a few more number variables. You can create one from scratch, just like how I showed you earlier, or you can just select this variable and hit Shift plus Enter to create a duplicate of this variable. Change the name to space LG and the value to 24. Remember, the names of the variables can't be the same in one group or collection. We will talk about groups and collections later. Duplicate it one more time and let's call this space XL and the value will be 32. The number variables, unlike color variables, can be applied to different places like in paddings, gaps, widths, heights, and more. For example, if I select this frame, we can see that we have some padding applied to it. Right next to it, we have the option to apply a variable. Just select the variable that you want to apply. Let's choose space LG. And now you can see the design gets updated. Let's do the same for the vertical padding. You can choose the number variable for gap as well. So for example, let's choose space XL for the gap in the auto layout frame. Similarly, you can apply number variables to any font size. Just select the text and in the font, click this variable option and choose variable that you want. However, number variables with values that are more suited for spacing might not work well for the font sizes. So let's create a few more variables for the fonts. Let's call this font medium, set the value to 16, duplicate it once more and call it font large, and the value for this one can be 20. Now if I go to font size and inside the variable option, we can see we have our newly created number variables for font sizes. Let's choose the variable that we want and let's do this for the other text as well. But see, as our variables grow, it can be a long list to choose from. And if I am just selecting a font size, I shouldn't see the variables for the spacing, so I don't select them by mistake. This is where scoping variables come in. To scope any variable or multiple variables, just multi-select them while holding the Command or Control on Windows and selecting them one by one, then right-click and you have this option to edit variables. Here you can control the scope of the variable. What it means is that you can control where these variables can be selected. By default, it's showing for every place possible. But as these are just space variables that are going to be used for layouts, we can unselect all of these and just check to show them in width and height and gap auto layout. This also includes padding. Let's do it for the font variables as well. And for these, I'm going to only choose font size. And now if I go to font select and in the variables, I will see only the relevant variables. And that's what's called variable scoping. Now let's create a string variable and call it font name. In the value of the string variable, you can enter any text. So we can enter the font name here. In our case, we are using Interfont, so let's type that in. Make sure the spelling of the font is correct. Now in the font selection, I can choose the option to apply the variable and select the font name variable. A string variable can also be used to create dynamic text values for any text, for example, menu items or card headings or anything like that, but it is not recommended because it can get very messy and hard to manage. Finally, there is another type of variable that you can create. It's called Boolean variable, but these are mostly useful if we have different modes. So first, let's look at what are modes and how to create them. Modes can help you create different variations of your variables in a way that can convert the design into different themes, for example, light or dark theme. Modes can also help you create variations of variables for different screen sizes. Let me explain. To create a new mode, we have this plus icon. Modes are only available in paid Figma plans, but I think the power of modes is worth having a paid plan because it makes designing process much faster and streamlined. Click this plus option and it will create another column. And now you can see that it has renamed both columns to mode 1 and mode 2. You can create multiple modes if you like, but for basics, let's just keep it to 2. You can rename mode 1 by double clicking on it, and let's call this light and let's call mode 2 as dark. Now in the dark column, we can see that it has essentially duplicated the values from the light column, but we can change it to something else. What I want is that when my design switches to this dark mode, the colors should automatically change. For example, in this mode, I can change this purple to something like a light purple, and this white should change to black, and this black should go to maybe a lighter color. We are kind of just inverting the colors here. Let's leave it like this for now. To change any frame to a different mode, just select the frame, and in the properties panel next to appearance, we have this option to apply variable modes. Here you can see your collection, and if you go inside it, we have the modes that we just created. By default, it's set to auto. This means that it will inherit the mode from its parent. But in our case, we don't have any parent. so it's set to auto light. Now if I select dark, we can see that our variables are now using the colors from our newly created dark mode, and our design is completely changed. It works like magic. It may not feel like a big deal when you're working with just one card, but think about hundreds of different designs and different screen designs, and you can change different themes with just one click. We can just switch to any theme just like this. Now let's just go over a few basic concepts of how to use this variable panel. You can multi-select variables, right-click and group them together just like this. You can rename the group by double-clicking on it just like this. Now if we click all variables, we can see we have our variables grouped together in the type group. Let's do it for the other variables as well. Grouping is optional, but it makes managing the variables much easier, especially when we have many variables. A neat little trick that you must know is that when you are in all variables, you can create a new variable just like this and just name it like color/test, and it will create a group of color and put the variable test inside it. We already have a color group, so it will just put it inside that group, just like this. Let's delete this variable for now. All these variables are now in groups, but these groups are actually inside a bigger category called collections. Right now, our collection is called collection 1. You can rename the collection just like this, and you can create further new collections altogether. Each collection has different modes, which we will discuss in the advanced part of the video. So let's dive into it. This is advanced features of variables. Let's close this and go to advanced page. Here we have a simple design. It does not use any variables or styles. We are going to learn everything from scratch. On top of this frame, we have some basic components that make up our design. I have deliberately not created components for elements like button and input because I wanted to show you how to use these advanced variables for creating components and variants. Let's go into the variables and just delete the variables that we created in the basic chapter of this video and start from scratch. So far, what you've learned about the variables was just scratching the surface. If you use the variables in the way that I showed you, you're going to have a major problem down the line. Let me explain why. Imagine you have this purple color and you have created a variable for this and named it purple. You are using this variable in multiple components like a button, an avatar, a tag, a pie chart, and a card. If you want to change the color of the card, you can just change the color code in the variables and it changes the color of the card. You haven't changed the name of the variable, but it still works. But see, the problem is that the other component colors are also changed because we are using the same variable for different components. We don't want this. To fix this, we can create different variables with the same color value, but we just name them differently. For example, button background, avatar background, tag background, chart background, and card background. And now we can just map these to our components separately. And now if I want to change the color of the card to pink, we can just swap the value of the card background variable and it works. This has fixed our problem, but now we have another problem. Imagine later down the road, I realized the purple color that I was using was supposed to be a different shade of purple. With this system, we would have to go and change the color value of purple in each variable. It may not look like a big deal when you just have a few components, but when there are hundreds of components, it will take you a lot of time. Luckily, we have a solution for this. We're gonna delete the extra colors and keep the main colors in this collection and move the rest of the variables to another collection. The first collection we're gonna call the primitive or brand collection, and the second collection we're gonna call semantic or mapped. Now we can just attach the variable from our primitive collection to the semantic collection like this. If I want to change the color of the pie chart, I can just connect the pink color from our primitive collection to the variable that we are using for the pie chart in the semantic collection. And just like this, the pie chart is now pink. Now, if I later decide to change the purple to some other shade of purple, I will not have to do it all over the place. I can just change it in the primitive collection and we are done. This two-tier of variables solves all of our problems. But what I like to do is add another collection in between primitive and semantic. We can call this alias. This is optional, but it can help us down the road when we want to switch to different themes. In this alias collection, we can create some variables like primary and secondary. And now let's say we want to use purple as our primary, we can just attach it to the primary variable and attach the pink to our secondary. Let's say we add a blue color in our primitive collection, And now when we want to switch to a blue theme, we can just connect the primary to our blue color and it will get applied everywhere. I'm sure this is a bit confusing to you right now, but trust me, by the end of this video, you will master this concept. For now, just remember these are our goals. We should be able to manage and modify variables with ease. We should be able to switch to different themes. We should have a light and a dark mode, and our designs should be responsive for different screen sizes. Now let's learn how we can do all this with an actual example. Alright, so let's go back into the variables panel. First, we're going to create all of our color variables. You can create your first color variable just like this. We are going to rename this collection to brand, and in here we are going to put all the colors and the shades and tints of the colors that we are ever going to need. Now, if you have a color palette already decided, you can continue creating variables manually, but if you are someone like me who doesn't have any colors and wants to do everything from scratch, I recommend using this plugin called Tailwind CSS Color Generator. Let's delete this collection because that plugin will do everything for us. Run the plugin. Let's move these to the side so we can see what's going on. So in the plugin, you can choose your base color, and it will create all these shades and tints of that base color. Let's go with this purple color. The great thing about this plugin is that it can automatically create variables for you and save you a lot of time. You can name the color here. Let's call this purple and click create variables. And now look, in our variables panel, it has populated with all these colors. It has automatically created a collection by the name of colors and also created a group of purple in which it has added all the color variables. The group name is exactly the name that we gave in the plugin. The name of the variables is from 50 to 950, which is very common pattern used by the designers, 50 being the lightest shade and 950 being the darkest shade of the color. Let's add another one, and this time let's go with the pink color. Let's name this pink and create variables, and there you go. We have our pink group which has created all the pink variables inside it. So in a way it organizes the variables in groups, which is very neat. Let's add more colors. Let's go with a blue one and add the variables, add a green one. You can control the hue and saturations and find the color you need, or you can just put in the color code of your base color in here just like this. Let's go with a bit darker. Let's call this green and add it to the variables. Now we need a red and a yellow for our error and warning colors, so we can quickly add those just like how we added the rest of the colors. And finally, for the neutral colors, I'm gonna write in the white color hex code here, and it will generate all these shades of gray from white to black. Now I'm gonna call this gray and add it to the variables just like this. Now, one of the things that I would like to do is rename this collection to brand. Some people call this primitive as well, but I like to call it grand so that I know that every base color is going to be inside our brand collection. Every base variable is gonna go inside this brand collection. Now, one of the things that I like to do is change this 50 gray variable from complete white to a very light gray, and then just add two more variables by the name of white and black and give them pure white and black color. It makes it much more easier for me to differentiate between pure white and black color. Now our brand collection for the color is ready. It's time to add a second layer of tokens, because remember, our goal is to make variables easier to manage, and we need to add different themes and dark and light modes. So let's create another collection just like this and call this alias. In this collection, I want all the colors from our brand color except for a few. And I will tell you why in just a few minutes. So let's go into the brand collection and let's select all the groups. Just select the top one and hold shift key and just select the bottom one to select them all. And now just press Command C or Control C on Windows to copy it. And then let's go back to the alias collection and just make sure to click in the middle at least 2 times and then just paste it. I don't know, sometimes if you don't click it, it doesn't work, and just paste it inside the design, which we don't want. Now we have all the same colors from our brand in alias as well, but we are going to make a few changes. First, we're going to rename these groups so that they have some meaningful names in the context of the design. So imagine if you are going to use this purple as your primary brand color, then we can just rename the group and call it primary. another thing that we're going to do is map the value of each variable to an existing variable from our brand collection. So if I click this and instead of choosing a custom color, I can go into the libraries tab, I will see all the variables from our brand collection. Here it shows that it is from the brand collection. So we want to map this to the same value variable. So for 50 variable in alias, we choose purple 50. Now you gotta understand that this value is being inherited from this purple 50 from our brand collection. If this changes, it will automatically change it from the alias. More on that later. For now, let's map the rest of the variables. So in the alias collection, let's select this 100 value and select purple 100, for 200, purple 200, and let's just quickly do it for the rest of the primary variables. Now we have our primary variables ready. The next thing is to decide our secondary color. We're gonna go with the pink color. So let's rename this pink to the secondary. See, we are just naming them something meaningful. Now let's go into the secondary variables. And in here, we are going to repeat the same process of mapping. So for secondary 50, we're gonna select pink 50 from our brand collection. For 100, we choose pink 100. For 200, we select pink 200. You get the idea. Let's do it for the rest of the secondary variables. Alright, so we're done with the secondary variable. Now for the blue color, we are not going to use this blue color in our alias collection for now. Just forget about this blue color for now. This will come later and I will show you when. Let's just delete this for now. Next we have green. We are going to use this for our success color. Again, just do the same process of mapping success variables to green variables from our brand collection. Next we have red, which we are going to use for error. So let's rename this to error. Let's go inside this group and repeat the same process. Then next we have yellow, which we are going to use for warning. Let's rename this to warning. Go inside this group and repeat the same process. Finally, we have gray, and we're going to call this neutral because these are going to be our neutral colors. We are gonna map all the neutral variables to our brand gray variables. Just repeat the same process. If you want to save some time, you can get the final Figma file for a very low cost with all the variables added to it already, which you can just copy paste into your projects wherever you like. The link is in the description. But I will recommend not to pay me and just follow this video and you will get there for free. That's the reason I made it paid, so people don't just cheat and get the final Figma file rather than going through the process and actually learning something. Alrighty, so we are done with the alias collection. We are going to be coming back to this when we create different themes, but for now let's create our final third collection for colors, and we're gonna name it mapped. Some people call it semantic, but I like to call it mapped because these are the variables that we are actually gonna map to our designs. Now in mapped collection, we can create variables for every different component like button background, button text, input backgrounds, input text. But creating variables at a component level is very hard to maintain. So we're going to use a special technique where we are just going to create a few categories of variables that can be applied to every component. So let's start with the surface. Let's create a color variable and name it surface/primary. What it's going to do is it's going to create a group called surface and it's going to create a variable called primary inside that group, just like this. Surface variables are the variables that we are going to use for the backgrounds essentially. And for our primary background, it's going to be a very light shade of gray. This can be different for you based on your design choices. Now, if I select this value, I'm not gonna select this as a custom color. I'm going to choose the white color variable that we have already created. However, we are seeing variables from both brand collection and the alias collection. That's why we named them differently so we can identify them easily. Brand variables are pink, purple, red, and the alias variables have meaningful names like primary, secondary, success, etc. In the mapped collection, we always use variables from alias collection and never from the brand collection. So for this one, we will search neutral, and remember, neutral is a group we created in the alias collection, and we are going to use neutral 50 variable from this neutral group. And there you go, we have mapped it to our alias collection variable. Now let's duplicate this variable. Remember how we duplicate it. Just select the variable that you want to duplicate and then press Shift plus Enter on your keyboard. Let's call this page. This is going to be used for our page background color. I'm going to map it to neutral white, just like this. Let's duplicate these a bunch of times and start creating more surface variables. We need a secondary, which I'm going to map to neutral 100. We need an action surface, which is going to be our primary 500. Remember, we don't pick purple 500 because that is from the brand collection. Pick primary 500, which is the same color but from the alias collection. Let's add another for action hover and map it to primary 700. The colors you pick are totally up to you. This is very different for different designs, and you can always come back to it and change it to a different shade. The key thing is the variables that we are creating can support almost every scenario while actually designing. Let's add a disabled and give it neutral 300. Add success and let's give it success 50. For the error, let's give it error 50, and finally for the warning, give it warning 50. Let's see if we need any other variable. Maybe we need an action hover light. So let's add that and give it light primary color and put it over here so it's in order. I think that's it for the surface. Next, let's create text variables. For that, I'm gonna duplicate the surface group like this and rename it to text. In the text group, I can just add or remove or change the variables that I want. So let's delete the page because this is irrelevant for text. Now for our primary text color, it's going to be different from our primary surface color. So I can change it to something like neutral 950. I selected this because I know our background or surface is going to be a very light gray, and this dark neutral 950 is going to look really nice on it. For the secondary, I'm going to use this for like a subtext, so it's gonna be a lighter shade than the primary text color, so something like neutral 700 would work. Next we have action, which is going to be our brand text color. So I'm gonna leave it the same as the surface brand color. I'm gonna keep the action hover and action hover light and disable the same as well because they're gonna work well for me for the text as well. I'm gonna need another text variable for on disabled, which is going to be used for a text that is going to be on a disabled surface. So let's duplicate it and give it a bit darker shade, maybe neutral 500. And for success text, I want it to have a nice contrast, so let's give it success 700. For error, I'm going to choose error 700, and for the warning, let's choose warning 600. And probably we're gonna need another variable called on action, which we are going to use if the text is on an action surface, which is very saturated purple color. So let's give it a neutral white color. Actually, we don't need action hover light in the text, so let's just delete that. Now we are done with the text variables, so let's duplicate it and rename it to icon. Now mostly icons are gonna have the exact same variables with the exact same values as the text, but I still like to create a separate group of them just in case I need to add some different shapes to the design, and I can just use those variables in the icon group. Finally, we need another group for the border, so let's duplicate this icon group and rename it to border just like this. Our border primary is going to be neutral 50. Border secondary is going to be tad darker, so maybe neutral 100. We don't need an on action, but we might need a tertiary border, so let's call this tertiary and change it to neutral 200. Border action hover, and border disabled are going to work if I keep them the same. Don't need on disabled, so let's rename it and call this focus and give it maybe primary 200. Let's actually change it to be a bit darker, maybe 400. Nope, too dark. Let's go with 300. Let's keep the rest of them as same. Alright, we are done with all our color variables and the collections. It takes time, but trust me, it's going to be worth it. Let's start applying these variables to our design. First, let's just assign variables to our components here. For these icons here, if I try to change the color, I can see that it's showing me all the color variables from all the collections, which can be very confusing. So we need to scope unwanted variables out. So remember, we talked about scoping in the basics class. We're just gonna do that now. Let's go into the variables panel and first go into the brand collection. We are never going to expose our brand and alias variables anywhere ever. We are just gonna use the mapped collection variables in our designs. So let's select all of the variables like this, right click and go to edit variables and just uncheck show in all properties just like this, and do this for the alias variables as well. Now if I select these icons and try to assign a variable, I can see that it is only showing me the variables from the mapped collections, neatly organized in groups that we just created. Alright, so these are icons, so I'm going to search variables from the icon group. Now choose the primary icon color just like this. Let's do this for this icon here as well. Let's select both of these texts, and this time I'm going to give it primary text color from the text group. For the background of this component, I'm going to apply a surface variable primary, because remember, for the backgrounds we always use surface variables. For the stroke, I'm going to choose the border variable. So let's choose border action for this one just to give it some color. But notice I applied the color through the selection color, so it also applied this border action variable to this text. So let's select this text and we can see that it has a fill of border action. Remember, we always assign variables from the group matching the element. For typography, we use text variables. For icons, we use from the icon variables. For the stroke, we use from the border variables. And for the backgrounds of any component, we choose from the surface variables. So let's give it text action. Now for these two variants, they have a stroke, so let's change the color to border variable. Now you could set it to any border variable like border primary, but it does not look right as this is supposed to be a disabled variant. So depending on the context of the design, you can choose the corresponding variable. In this case, we are going to choose border disabled. Again, for this text, you can choose to assign it to text primary, but we want it to look disabled, so we choose text disabled. And this is the whole reason why we created these different variables to support different scenarios. And if there is a scenario where you don't have that variable, you can just go into the panel and just create another variable in that group. Now let's continue with our design and start applying these variables wherever we have used a direct custom color. Let's see, in this navbar we can see that we don't have any custom color, which is great. Let's select this listing section. Here we have a few places where we need to apply colors. So for example, for all of these texts, ignore these ones because they are already applied in the components. I'm going to apply them text primary just like this, and for these subtexts we are going to use text secondary, which is slightly lighter shade of the text primary. Now I told you that I didn't make these buttons into a component, so I can show you that how to use these 3-tier variables to create components with different variants. So let's do this. First, just duplicate this button over here. Let's delete this icon and let's bring in the heart icon from our component. Let's put it inside our frame over here. This is an auto layout, so it fits nicely. Now, if you are not familiar with auto layouts, I suggest you check out my complete Figma course. In that video, I cover every topic of Figma in detail. The link is shown on the top right corner of the video. This frame has some minimum width applied to it, so let's just remove it for now, just like this, and then set the width to hug contents. These are all just the concepts of auto layout in Figma, so I highly suggest if you don't know what auto layouts are, go check out my course. Alright, so for the background of this button, I'm going to select the fill and apply surface action because this is going to be our call to action button. And for the icon, I'm going to apply the on action variable from the icon group, which is essentially a white color. Finally, for the text, we are going to use on action variable, but this time it's going to be used from the text group. Now let's make it into a component, and let's quickly select this icon and make it swappable using the instance swap property. Again, if you don't know how to do that, check out my complete Figma course. It's 100% free. Don't pay for an expensive useless Figma course. I cover everything in that video. The link is also available in the description of this video. Let's add some variants of this component just like this, and let's change the property name to state. This variant is going to be a hovered variant, so let's set the status to hovered. For the fill of this variant, I'm going to choose action hover from the surface variables. Let's add another variant. This is going to be the focused state. Now, focus state of a button can be of different design based on your preferences, but I like to have like a light color stroke around the button. I can add a stroke like this, but it's gonna be a problem in our outline buttons where we already have a stroke on it. So what I like to do is fake a stroke using a drop shadow effect. Let me show you how to do that. Add a drop shadow effect like this. In the options, actually make sure that you have the clip content on, otherwise this technique will not work. In the drop shadow options, set X to 0, Y to 0, blur to 0, and set the spread to 4. In the color, choose the focus variable that we created in the border group. This will create this nice little border around it without using a stroke. Let's add another variant, and this is going to be our disabled state. And for the background, I'm going to give it a surface disabled, and for the text, I'm going to choose text on disabled. I'm not choosing disabled because this text is on a disabled surface, so that's why I'm choosing on disabled. And similarly for the icon, I'm going to choose icon on disabled. Now, what if we wanted an outline button variant as well? So let's create a new property and call that style. Let's duplicate this default button to add another variant. We can see the state and the style is set to default for this. So let's add another variant, and the style of this variant is going to be outlined. For this one, I'm going to choose a stroke and set it to border action. Remove the fill and set the text and the icon colors to text action and icon action, just like this. Add another variant. This is going to be outlined with a hovered state. In the fill for this one, I'm going to set the action hover light from our surface group. Now imagine if you didn't have this variable, you could always go into the surface group and add it. For the border, I'm going to use border action hover. The text is going to be text action hover, and the icon is going to be icon action hover. Let's add another variant for the focused outline button. I need the same focus border around it that I created using drop shadow over here. So let's actually make it into a local style so that we can reuse it whenever we want. Change the state to focused for this variant, and let's apply that local style effect just like this. See, it didn't work. One of the reasons is that the clip content is not selected, but even if we select it, it still doesn't work. See, for this technique to work, the frame must have a fill, but we don't have a fill for this one as it's an outline button. That's why it didn't work. Now, what I do to tackle this is that I just add a fill of custom white color just like this and set the opacity to 0.01. That way it looks transparent, but it tricks Figma into thinking that there is some kind of fill to it. This is a neat little trick that I learned with my experience with Figma. Now let's add a disabled variant just like this. For the background, we choose surface disabled, and for the text, we choose text on disabled, and for the icon, we choose icon on disabled. Now look, these two are exactly the same. The reason is that the border disabled has the same color as surface disabled, which doesn't work for us. So we can go into the variables panel and change the border disabled to a darker shade just like this. It means that you can go back to the variables and just change them slightly to fit your design choices. Now it looks perfect. We are done with our button component. Let's put it over here and let's try another exercise by creating input component. So let's duplicate it over here and make it into a component. I'm not gonna create instance swap properties for the icons for this component to save some time. Let's give it a background of surface primary. For these icons, I'm going to choose secondary text variable, and for this text, I'm going to choose text disabled because this is not a filled state. This is just like an inactive input state. Let's add another variant and rename the property to state, and this one is going to be hovered. For the hovered variant, I'm going to add a stroke and set it to border action hover. And for the icons, I'm going to choose icon action hover because I want to add some color to it. This is still an inactive state, which means that the text is not filled. So I'm gonna leave the text as disabled. I think you get the idea of how to use the variables to create component variants. So let's stop with the variants and just put this input component over here. Let's copy this button component, select this button frame and replace it using Command Shift R or Control Shift R on Windows, and replace this one as well. Change the variant of this one to outline like this, and for this one let's replace the icon and choose bag icon and change the text. Oh, actually, we want to change the text of this one to save for later. Let's replace the input with the input component as well. I think we are almost done. Let's just select this frame and see if there is any direct color still being applied. Yeah, there is one. I think it's the border for this card. So let's select it and change it to border primary or maybe border secondary. You can choose whatever you think is right for you. I think border secondary works for me in my design. For this parent frame, we have a white custom color selected. So I'm gonna choose this and select surface page. This is why I created page variable for the main frame, and you're going to see how it plays into action in the dock mode. Now imagine if you wanted some other color instead of purple for your design. You could just go into your brand collection and switch it out to something like pink, and it updates everywhere. But that's not all. Remember, I told you in the alias we are going to create different modes for different themes. So let's go into alias collection and add another mode just like this. Let's rename this one to purple theme and this one to blue theme. Imagine that you have a winter promotion running on your website and you want to switch to a complete blue theme. Now with modes you can easily do that. To achieve this, in the blue theme column, you can just map these variables to some other color from our brand collection. So for the primary 50 variable, we can assign blue 50. This blue is one of the colors in the brand collection. We added it there, but we were not using it anywhere up till this point. So it means that in the brand collection, you can just dump all of your colors and map them to your primary or secondary or whatever in the alias collection later on. Let's continue doing so. Map primary 100 to blue 100, primary 200 to blue 200, and continue doing this for all the primary colors. Now I've just mapped the primary colors just to illustrate you the power of different themes. You can do this for the other colors like secondary, success, or warning if you want them to have a different color in different theme. But for now, let's just test this out. To apply a different mode, you can just select any frame, and next to appearance we have this option to apply modes. Here you can go into the collection and choose the mode you want. Let's switch to blue theme. Notice that the whole purple theme is now switched to that blue theme. Everywhere where we were using the purple color is now using the blue color. Pretty amazing, right? But that's not all. Now, if I go into the mapped collection, I can create another mode here for light and dark modes just like this. But if I go and apply this to our frame, nothing happens. That's because it just duplicated the same values for the dark mode as the light mode. You can switch these variable values to make a custom dark mode. For example, we decide, okay, so in the dark mode, our surface page is going to change from neutral white to maybe a neutral 900. Actually, let's select 950 to have a darker shade. Now see, the design is updated, but we can still see some whites because those are using surface primary variables. So let's change the surface primary in the dark mode column to something like neutral 900. And for the secondary, let's choose neutral 800. We still can't see the text. So in the text group, we can change the primary text color from neutral 900 to neutral white. For the text secondary, let's choose neutral 50, and we can see that the dark mode starts to take shape very quickly. Let's switch the icon colors to light colors in the dark mode as well, just like this. Borders are a bit too strong in my opinion, so let's change them in the dark mode column. Looking good. Maybe disabled can be a bit darker here as well. You can continue doing so based on what look you want to achieve in your dark mode. But in our case, this is looking pretty good. Now, I can switch to the blue and purple theme with the dark mode and the light mode. So you have essentially created 4 different kinds of theme by just using variables. That is the power of variables, and this is just the color variables. In our goals, so far we have achieved a way to manage variables that is easy to maintain when you scale your designs. We have achieved a way to create different themes quickly and apply them. We are also able to switch between light and dark modes. Now it's time to learn about how to use these variables for responsive design. So let's dive in. First, let me switch to dark mode because I like dark modes and select the blue theme. Now, if I resize this frame, it's a bit responsive, but barely. And that is because we are using auto layouts. Don't get me wrong, auto layouts help a lot in making responsive designs, but they are not enough. For example, the text and the paddings are way too big in tablet mode, and when we go to the mobile, it just completely becomes a mess. See, even if you are using auto layout to make your designs responsive, when you go from a desktop to mobile view, the gaps and the padding around the auto layout frame remain the same, which is not what they should be. They should be smaller in the mobile frame, a bit bigger in a tablet, and even bigger in a desktop frame. And same goes for the text. On the desktop, the text can be bigger, but on a mobile screen, the text should be smaller. This can be achieved using variables. Let's learn how we can do this. First, let's go to the variables panel and inside the brand collection. Remember, I told you all the basic design tokens will always go in the brand collection. First, let's create a group by creating a variable and naming it color/temp. It's gonna create a color group with a temp variable. Now select all of these color groups and just drag and drop them inside this color group. And in this color group, let's just delete this temp variable. We just created this to create the group because the actual way of creating the group is not working for me for some reason. Maybe it's a bug. Now we have all our colors grouped together. We can go into all variables and create another variable, but this time choose a number variable. Let's call it size/size0, which is going to create a group by the name of size and create a variable called size0. Now let's just go into the size group, and here we are going to create our base scale size. I like using a 4px grid. You can choose whatever scale you want. I think 4px works for every scenario. We have our size0. Let's duplicate this variable and call this size1 and set it to 1. Duplicate it once more, call this size4 and set it to 4. After that, keep duplicating and add 4 to the previous one. So the next one is going to be size 8, set it to 8, size 12, set it to 12, then 16, then 20, then 24. Continue doing so till you reach the size 40. After 40, we are going to make jumps of 8 because for the bigger values, our scale grows exponentially. So after size 40, we have size 48, which is set to 48. Then we have 56. Then we have 64. After 64, I'm gonna make even a bigger jump of 32 and go to size 96 directly. Then size 128, and then just duplicate it and make it size 256. All right, so that's going to be our base spacing and sizing scale. Now let's create another collection and call it responsive. The reason why I am creating a new separate collection from alias and mapped is that I am using those collections for modes of colors, but I want a different mode now for different screen sizes. So I'm gonna do that in this new responsive collection. So first variable that we are going to create for this responsive collection is going to be a number variable, and we're gonna call it screen size. You can call it breakpoint or whatever, but I like to call it screen size. In the value, I am going to set a desktop width that I am designing for. In our case, it's 1440px. In Figma, we can also see that the preset desktop frame is 1440px as well. You can ignore the height because height is always changing based on the content size. For the tablet, I'm going to choose 1024 width, and for the mobile size, I'm going to go with the iPhone 16 size, which is 393. In the variables, let's call this mode desktop, add another mode and call it tablet. And in this mode, the width will change to 1024 and add another one for the phone. And in here, the width is going to be 393. Let's just adjust them so we can see them all at once like this. So that's going to be our frame width for different screen sizes. and I will show you how to apply them in just a moment. Before that, let's create another variable and give it the name jumper slash 64-32. What it's gonna do is that it's gonna create a jumper group and place that 64 to 32 variable in it. Now, jumper variables are spacing values that are going to change for different screen sizes. For this 64-32, what I mean is that on desktop it's gonna be 64, and we're gonna pick that 64 from our brand collection size variables, just like this. Then when we go into the tablet mode, this 64 should change to maybe 48. And finally in the mobile, it should change to 32. And that is why we called it 64 to 32. The important thing is that you pick the values from the brand collection rather than entering manual values. Because in future, if we change the brand collection sizing, it automatically changes in the jumper variables. Let's just apply them as we go. So let's first select our main frame, and in the width, I'm going to apply our screen size variable. But see, again, we are seeing brand variables in here. Remember the rule, we never use brand or alias variables directly in our design. So let's go into the brand collection and just select all our sizing variables and descope them and just hide them from everything, just like this. Let's go back to our responsive collection. I want the screen size variable to just show in the width and the height, so let's remove it from everything and turn on width and height. And these jumper variables are always going to be used for paddings and gaps and never for anything else. So let's just descope them and select auto layouts just like this. Now if I go to apply width, I can just select the screen size variable. Now that our variable is applied, we can go into the mode selection option, and in the responsive collection we can see our different screen size modes. If I switch to a tablet, look, the width is now automatically updated, and same thing happens if I choose phone mode. Don't worry about the design being a mess, we are gonna fix that in just a moment. Now let's just select this listing section, and in our auto layout options we can see that we have 64 gap and 64 padding around it. If I change the gap to our jumper variable 64 to 32 and do this for the padding as well, now when I jump to the tablet mode, look, the padding and the gap has been reduced. It was 64 before, now it's 48. Which is exactly what we set in our jumper variable 64 to 32 for the tablet mode. But the problem is that in the tablet mode, I feel like the gap is nice, but the padding 48 is a bit too large. It should be a bit smaller. To fix this, what we can do is duplicate this variable and call it 64 to 20. And on desktop, it's gonna remain 64. In the tablet, it's gonna switch to something like 36. And on the phone it should go to 20. And now in the padding around it, I can change my jumper variable from 64 to 32 to 64 to 20. And now our padding is reduced to 36 while the gap is still 48. In the phone mode, we can see we have 20 padding and the gap is 32, which I think is a bit too much. So let's change it to something like 24. So that's the whole idea of jumper variables like 64 to 32 or 64 to 20. This supports a wide range of different layouts. You can just keep adding jumper variables to make the design you want. Some people like to use semantic names like medium to large or medium to 3XL. Personally, I understand numbers better, so it's totally up to you if you want to use t-shirt naming for your jumper variables. For me, this makes more sense. So let's continue with our design and let's select this nav bar, and for the horizontal padding, let's apply this 64 to 32 jumper variable. But see, now in the vertical padding, it is set to 32. And for that, we don't have any variable currently. So let's quickly create that. Let's call this 32 to maybe 24. So on desktop, it's gonna be 32. On tablet, it's gonna remain 32. And on the phone, it should drop to maybe 28. Let's apply that. Before testing, let's select this main auto layout and set the gap between them to be 64 to 32. And for this section here, we have a gap of 32. So let's change it to 32 to 24 variable. Now, if I select this auto layout frame, we can see that we have gap of 24, but we don't need to apply variables at this level because it's not going to change for any different screen size. The same goes for all these sections here as well. The gap between them is not going to change, so we don't use variables for this. This is a very rookie mistake that people make, that they use variables for everything possible, and it just makes it very hard to manage. It's okay not to use variables where they are not needed. Anyways, for this section, I'm going to choose 64 to 20. The same goes for the footer. In the horizontal padding, it's gonna be 64 to 20, and in the vertical padding, it's gonna be 32 to 24. Let's change the mode to tablet. Everything looks perfect. The sections are aligned perfectly. Let's switch to phone. The padding around looks perfect in the phone mode as well. Let's fix the listing section and make it responsive for the phone. Now, to make the design perfectly responsive, auto layout and variables have to go hand in hand. Auto layout cannot make it perfectly responsive alone, and the variables alone cannot make your design completely responsive. The problem with this listing section is that it is using auto layout that is not set up correctly. We can see that it's a horizontal auto layout, but in fact it should wrap when we go to a smaller screen size. So let's switch it to wrap auto layout. In order for the wrap to work in auto layout, we must have a minimum width for its contents. So let's select this frame over here and add a minimum width. Now listen carefully. I want it to scale down until I reach some minimum width. And what is that minimum width going to be? It's going to be the width of my phone size frame, which is 393, minus the padding we have around the phone size, which is 20 on both sides. So 393 minus 40, which gives us the value of 353. 40 is basically adding padding of 20 and 20 on each side. Now, if I switch to the phone mode, look, it is scaled down until it reached 353 width, and then it wrapped the content in the next line. The width of this frame is now 353 and we have a padding of 20 around it. Beautiful. Now let's do this for our newsletter frame here as well. First, select the frame and set it to wrap instead of horizontal auto layout. In this frame, notice we have a fixed 96 gap and 32 padding on each side. So let's create a jumper variable for this because 96 is way too big for a phone. So let's just duplicate this and maybe call it 96 to 48. On the desktop, it's going to be 96, and then on the tablet, it's going to drop to 64, and on the phone, it should drop to maybe 48. And for the padding, let's change it to 32 to 24. We still need to apply the minimum width to make the wrap auto layout work. So let's select this child frame and add a minimum width. Again, you can use the same formula as before, which is phone size minus all paddings around it. But for this one, I'm just gonna manually reduce it because I think this works. Now, the content is wrapping nicely to the next line, and actually we forgot to apply variable to the vertical gap of the wrap. So let's apply that 96 to 48. And I think this now looks pretty good. Let's quickly make it wrap as well. Select the text and add a minimum width of 353. Just select the parent frame and change the auto layout from horizontal to wrap. Great, now it's looking awesome except for this ugly nav bar where the menus are kind of overlapping the logo. So let's switch it to the tablet mode. So what we have here is that we have a hamburger menu and some additional menus here over the right. On the tablet and a desktop mode, it looks perfect. But on the mobile, it doesn't work because we don't have enough room for all the menus. So we can just hide the menus on the right and keep the hamburger menu in the phone mode. And that is exactly how it works in actual websites. So how do we do that? First, let's create a Boolean variable and call this show full menu. In the desktop mode and the tablet mode, we can turn it true, and in the phone, we can keep it false. We want to apply this variable to this menu here, but we can't just apply a Boolean variable to any frame. To apply a Boolean variable, it must be inside a component. So let's bring this navbar out and make it into a component, and let's put an instance back in. In the main component, I can select this frame now with all menus, and in the appearance, I can see I have this little option to apply a variable or a property. And here we can see our Boolean variable that we just created, and let's just apply that. It's gonna map the visibility of this frame to this Boolean variable. Now we have set the Boolean variable value to be true on desktop and tablet, which means the visibility of this frame is going to be true in the desktop and the tablet, and in the phone mode the visibility is going to be set to false. It is still showing on the tablet view, and let's jump to the phone mode and look, it's now hidden in the phone mode. And because we are using auto gap in auto layout, it has pushed the hamburger menu on the right side. Alright, now everything is super responsive and looking great, but there is still one improvement that we can make, which is typography. Currently, our font sizes remain the same for desktop, tablet, and phone modes, which works for body text sizes, but for the headings like this one in the actual phones, this will appear super big. We need to have a dynamic font size for different modes, so let's do that. Let's switch to desktop mode and move this over here. Oops, let me just organize this a bit so I don't lose my mind. Alright, responsive typography. First thing first, let's go into our brand collection and create a variable. This time it's going to be a string variable. Let's make a group of type, and the variable name is going to be font title. We are going to use this for the font of our heading. I'm only going to use one font for both my bodies and the headings. Let's give it the value of Inter. Inter is basically the font name. Make sure the spelling of the font you choose are correct, and this value is case sensitive. Let's duplicate it and call this one font body and set it to Inter as well. I'm using one font, but I created two separate variables just in case in future I decide to go for a different font for my headings or body. Let's add another one. Let's create a variable in a group. Let's call this weight/regular. In the value, I'm going to set it to regular. These are different weights of the font that I'm going to be using, and this is case sensitive as well. Let's duplicate it and call this semi-bold and set it to semi-bold value. And I think so these are just the two weights that I'm going to be using. Alright, let's just group these ones to make everything more organized. I'm gonna call it font. We have our base type variables ready, and if we select a text, we can go to the font and hit this icon over here and apply this variable. But we are not going to apply them just yet. First, we need to create different font sizes based on a type scale, and we are going to do that in our responsive collection because we already have the desktop, tablet, and phone modes in there. So let's create a number variable in the responsive collection and call this typescale/h1, and it's going to create a group of typescale and create a variable with h1 in it. So in this group, we are going to create all our type scale variables. Let's duplicate this variable a bunch of times and just rename them h6, h5, h4, h2. Let's duplicate it once again. Let's call this paragraph medium or paragraph MD, another one for paragraph large, and another one for paragraph small. Let's put our paragraph large on top over here so it's in sequence. We have our font size variable. Let's add some for the line heights because it's very important. Line heights are different for different font sizes. So h1 line height, then we have h2 line height, h3 line height, h4 line height, h5 line height, h6 line height, and the same goes for the paragraphs. Paragraph large line height, paragraph medium line height, and finally we have paragraph small line height. Alright, now we have the variables created. Let's set in the values now. If you already have a type scale, just use those values. If not, I like to use this plugin called TypeScales, which generates type scales for you automatically. Just run it. In the plugin, you have to give it a base font size. I like to use the standard 16px font size as my base body font size. So we can actually set paragraph medium to 16px. We are going to do the desktop values first. Let's set the base size 16 in the plugin, and next we have the option to choose the scale. The scale is basically how your font size increases as we go from paragraph to maybe H2 or H1. For desktop, in most designs, I personally think 1.25 scale, which is also called a major third, works perfectly. The line height I'm going to use as 1.4. Again, this is very subjective because 1.4 works nicely with Interfont, but for some fonts it might be too big. So you can choose the line height that suits your font. On the left here, we can see that it has already created all these different font sizes based on the scale we chose. It is gradually increasing from our base 16px, but you see it has created some odd values like 25px and this 31px, which I really don't like. I like to stick to my 4px grid and use the closest value from this scale, which is a multiple of 4. To explain this in an easy way, I'm gonna have to show you some calculations. So let's just drag this over here and bring in the calculator. Alright, so we have our base paragraph medium set to 16px. The next value on the scale is 20, so our paragraph large is going to be 20. The next value on the scale is 25, which is not a multiple of 4, but the nearest multiple of 4 to 25 is basically 24. So I'm going to use 24 instead of 25. Next, we have 31. Again, it is not a multiple of 4. The nearest one is 32, so let's go with that one. I think a 4px grid is awesome and I like to stick to it. Next, we have 39. The nearest multiple of 4 is 36. So let's set H4 to 36. Then H3 is going to be 48 instead of this 49. H2 is going to be 60 instead of 61. Let's increase the scale up to 7. So we have the value for H1 as well. So it has given me the value for 76 for H1. Let's check if it's a multiple of 4. Yes, it is. So let's go with this 76. Alright, so the scale up is done. What about the paragraph small? It is giving me the value of 13. The nearest 4px multiple is basically 12, but just for this one, I like to break the 4px grid rule and go with 14 instead of 12 because 12px is just not accessible at all, and I'm all for the accessibility. I would like to just mention here that if you want to save some time, you can get the final Figma file with all the variables already created and applied for a very low cost. The link is in the description of this video. Alright, next, let's set the line heights for each font size. I told you, line height is different for different font sizes. And I know what you're thinking. Dude, you said the line height is going to be 1.4, and that's what we have set over here. The thing is that 1.4 is our baseline height. The actual line height is actually calculated using this formula, font size multiplied by the baseline height. So for example, for H1, which is 76, we multiply it by 1.4 and it gives us the actual value of the line height, which is 106.4. Again, let's round it off to the multiple of 4, which is 104. Next, we have H2. So 60 into 1.4 is 84. So H2 line height is going to be 84. Then for H3, it's going to be 67.2, round off to 68. Continue doing this. So for H4, it's going to be 56. H5 line height is going to be 44. H6 is going to be 32. For paragraph large, it's going to be 28. And now for the paragraph medium, if we multiply 16 by 1.4, we get 22.4. So we choose 24 instead of 22.4. And finally, for the small, it's going to be 20. We are done with the desktop. We have created the type scales and the line heights for the desktop for all different fonts. Now for the tablet, we are just going to change our scale from major third to minor third, and I'll just update the values in the tablet mode just like before, and just make sure to go with the closest multiple of 4. For paragraph medium and small, we are going to ignore the scale drop. So we're gonna keep the 16 and 14 because we want to keep the body sizes same for the tablet and the phone sizes. The paragraph large is going to be 20, H6 is 24, H5 is 28, H4 is going to be 32, H3 is going to be 40, H2 is 48, and H1 is 56. Now for the line height, again calculate based on these new font sizes in the tablet mode. So 56 multiplied by 1.4 is 78.4, round off to 76. Then for H2, 48 multiplied by 1.4 is 67.2, round off to 68. You get the idea, and you can just continue doing so until you are done. All right, we are done with the tablet mode. So now let's do the phone mode. The font sizes for paragraph medium, paragraph small, and paragraph large is the same for different modes. So the line height is also going to be the same. So let's just put that in. Set the same values for the font sizes in the phone mode for paragraph large, paragraph medium, and paragraph small as the other modes, just like this. For the rest of the scale, I'm going to change the scale from minor third to major second. Now let's continue filling in the scale for mobile. H6 is going to be 20. Don't worry if it's the same as the paragraph large. H5 is going to be 28, H4 28, H3 32, H2 36, H1 40. Font sizes in the phone mode may not follow this scale major second perfectly, but it's not going to be a problem for us. Let's add the line height quickly and just follow the same process as before. Finally, we are done with our scale. Let's quickly organize them into groups so it's easier to manage. All the heading font sizes are going to be grouped together, and let's call this heading scale. Let's go back to our type scale group and select these paragraph sizes and group them into paragraph scale, just like this. Again, go back to the type scale group, select the paragraph line heights, group them and call them paragraph line height. And finally, let's group the heading line heights into a group called heading line height. It's looking very nice and organized now. It's time to apply these to our designs. Let's get rid of the calculator and make it full screen. Now I can select the text and apply the variable directly from here, but I highly recommend using a text local style and applying the variable inside the local styles. It makes much easier to manage in the future. So let's create a text style and call this H1, and in the font, let's apply the variable font title. I chose font title variable instead of font body, even though they are both the same font, because in the future, if I want to change the heading font to some other font, I would be able to do that very easily. For the font size, click down here to apply the variable and choose H1 variable. In the line height, apply the H1 line height variable. Actually, I think we should scope them so we don't see the irrelevant variables. So let's select the heading scale variables right from here and hide them from everywhere except for the font size. And let's do this for the paragraph scale as well. Let's select the line height variables just like this and just show them in the line height options. Let's check now. I still see this jumper variable in here, which shouldn't be there. So let's go to this variable and scope it out just like this. Now everything is scoped perfectly. Line height just shows in the line height variables, font sizes just show in the font size variables, and the font shows just the brand font variables. Now let's quickly create the rest of the local styles. It's nothing special. Just create the text style and apply the variable related to it. I'm gonna fast forward this section just to save some time. All right, so we have all our text styles ready. Let's apply them now. First, let's apply it to the components. For this text here, it's going to be paragraph medium. So let's select that from our local styles, just like this. These little texts are also going to be paragraph medium. All these button text are also going to be paragraph medium. This input text is also going to be paragraph medium. This listing title here, let's set it to H3. Let's actually try H4. I think H3 was fine. The price text can be H4. I think these are too big. Let's change the title to H4 and price to H5, or maybe even smaller like H6. Anyways, let's select all of these texts and set them to paragraph medium, and this one can be paragraph large, and let's just underline this text over here. This title and pricing text are still bothering me. Let's go with H3 for the heading and H4 for the pricing. I think it's fine for now. Let's switch to the tablet mode now. Look, the font size has reduced in the tablet mode, and when I go to the phone mode, it reduces further based on our font sizes in different modes. And there you go, everything is now responsive for desktop, tablet, and the phone. The paddings are responsive, the typography is responsive. This is so satisfying to me as a designer. We can switch to light and dark modes, we can switch to different themes with just a few simple clicks. I mean, it's beautiful. It does take some effort to set things up right at first, but once you do, it saves you tons of time. Here's the deal. Once you have set up this structure, you can just copy it into other projects and change the colors in your brand collection or change the type scale in your brand collection and give it a completely new look in just a few minutes. So that was it for today's video. I hope this has been helpful. Trust me, you are going to blow everyone's mind in the designer community if you know this skill. Huge companies have huge design systems that need to evolve into this new variable-based system for scalability, and companies are willing to pay huge amounts of money for people who know this. If you have learned something today, give it a thumbs up, and if you have any questions, drop it in the comments. I want all of us to be an active community of designers helping each other out. Subscribe to my channel to show your support. You can also support me by becoming my Patreon member, and you do get some perks if you become a member. Link is in the description. That's it for today. See you in the next one.